So, we pretty much both know why we're here. You've read the thumbnail, and so I'm going to fill you in. And let me introduce myself. I'm Leah. I'm a Londoner, and I have a very rare form of leukemia. The leukemia that I have is called Langerhans cell histiocytosis. And for those who wish to get straight onto Google, it's a condition that is very rare, and of those it does affect, just over 2/3 are young children. So the peak age for Langerhans is between the ages of 1 and 3 years old. Obviously, there are then those of us who are adults who get it. So we're a rare bunch of a rare bunch. So that's bad luck. As you probably know, leukemia is a cancer of the white blood cells, and most of the activity of the white blood cells is centered around immunity. And in me, one of the types of white blood cells, a lesser known type, and under certain conditions, those cells become Langerhans cells. And that's for a number of reasons. It happens to all of us. One of them is higher cortisol levels. So, stress, lovely. Then we have, under certain circumstances, and we know less about this, that these Langerhans cells become cancerous. And in roughly just over half of the people that have Langerhans, it's about just over 50% of us have a BRAF mutation. For those cancer aficionados, I have that myself, and I will be doing a more thorough discussion about symptoms and how we got to diagnosis and those sorts of things separately. But for now, it's a condition, a cancer, that starts in one of 3 places: the bones, the lung, or the skin. Mine started in my skin, hence the sitting in fiercely hot weather I'm British, it's hot to us, in a long-sleeved top, because I have lesions all over my arms and legs and shoulders, and we don't really know each other well enough for me to start frightening you with that sort of thing. I haven't really told many people about my leukemia until now, when I'm telling the whole internet. However, one thing I do know is that those people who are outside my treating team, and they're not doctors, even friends who are doctors, or pathologists, everybody else, one of the first questions is really often, what stage? And in common with a lot of blood cancers, they're not really staged. Sometimes they are, but often they're not. And also, cancer is staged so differently for different types of cancer. So, rule of thumb, a lot of cancers seem to be stage 1 to 4. However, some cancers have letters as well. So they could be 4B or 2C, and well, there you go. And with lymphomas, they're graded based on how much above the diaphragm or below the diaphragm it is. And you've got brain cancers, they're any stage from 1 to 3 anyway. And in fact, someone, I think in America, who faked their cancer, words fail me, but they did, and they were caught. But one of the reasons they were caught is because they had told someone at a fundraiser that they had stage 5 brain cancer. And the person they told, I think, was a nurse. Anyway, we don't really have staging. I'm not sure. It would be fantastically helpful to our conversation, but let me know. What I think people probably are asking is, how bad is it? I am extraordinarily fortunate, that it is a very treatable cancer, but it's not curable. And that means that you're in remission for however long you're in remission. It could be months, it could be years. I read a write-up from I think a Canadian doctor about their patient who currently had been in remission for 15 years. But clearly that was unusual enough to write up in a medical journal. It's very difficult in that situation where things aren't as panicked almost for patients with leukemia as they can be for patients with other types of cancer. So some patients with cancer are told at this point of diagnosis, you have to have surgery tomorrow because it's going to be life-saving, or we're starting on chemotherapy today. Langerhans, it's thankfully a little bit less panicked than that. Just to give you an example of how things are living with a cancer where, you're not dragged into the chemo room the day you're diagnosed, but you have to process it a bit, and that's quite hard sometimes to get your head around what it means for you. And at the last bank holiday in the UK, so that's effectively a 3-day weekend, including the Monday. Just before that weekend, I'd woken up on the Friday and I had a cold, and it was a reasonably bad cold. It wasn't flu, it wasn't COVID, it wasn't anything like that. It was a cold, but a fairly bad one. Like most people, I just thought, well, it's the summer. I think people get summer colds, so what? It may, if I'm lucky, be one of those 24-hour viruses. So I didn't think a huge amount of it. Didn't take any medication, just made sure I drank plenty of fluids. And sure enough, on the Saturday and the Sunday, I was feeling better. I hadn't completely gone, but I was certainly on the mend. And then on Monday, which was the public holiday here, I woke up and felt awful. And so I did what is medically necessary, and I moved from my bed to the sofa and put the least worst thing I could find on Netflix on, and felt a bit sorry for myself. And that was until just after lunch. I started to feel as though I was getting a temperature. And so I dug out my thermometer and took my temperature, and it was very high, very high. I apologised to those who work in Fahrenheit, but it was 39.4 Celsius centigrade. So it was a serious temperature. And so I thought I better phone, because one of the difficulties with having cancer is when you're ill, you're not sure whether it's cancer-related ill or just everyone gets colds. And as I was getting a high temperature, I thought I ought to do something. I'm very, very, very fortunate because my hospital that is treating my skin, Langerhans, is a hospital that has for cancer patients what they call a symptom line, and that's 24/7, staffed by nurses, oncology nurses, and you can ring up and have those conversations of, am I just ill or am I like cancer ill? And they're great, and because it's your hospital, they have your records, they know what your treatment has been, what your current bloods look like, latest scan. They have all your information. So the nurse asked me a few questions, and because they have your records in front of them, they're not asking the really annoying questions like, are you allergic to anything? These were questions about the current situation for me, and that was fine. Towards the end of the conversation, the nurse said, you need to ring an ambulance and get yourself to A&E, or the emergency room or emergency department, depending. It's an A&E department. You need to get yourself to A&E. And I was saying, but it's just a cold. I'd be really embarrassed going to A&E with a cold. And they said, no, you need to ring an ambulance and get yourself to hospital. And the nurse emailed me the sort of form that she'd been filling out, with basic details on it. And she said, and when you get there, you hand that to the doctor. And I said, okay, but if I ring an ambulance, say I've got a cold, they're going to laugh at me. And she said, you've got leukemia, your immune system isn't working well anyway, and now your temperature spiked. You need to be in hospital. So I thought, well, okay. The ambulance crew were fantastic. Yes, ambulances are part of the NHS. The ambulance crew were fantastic. They did test my oxygen saturation as well. And that's the sort of clip that goes on the end of your finger often. And that's supposed to be, I don't know, I think somewhere in the region of 94.5 to 98%. Which is something. Mine was 78, and I didn't know, in the sense that I didn't feel suddenly very breathless or pain in my chest. I didn't seem to have any symptoms that weren't a bad cold. And so they started me on oxygen therapy. We then went to the hospital. I fully expected I was sitting on a chair for hours, because that's what happens. hours and hours, and I arrived, and the ambulance staff tell the doctors, this is Leah Say, she is this old, she is from here, she has leukemia, and so I was they wheeled me straight into a cubicle. It wasn't just a cubicle, it was a proper room, a side room, not a resus room, I was fully conscious, but a side room. And in the side room, immediately 2 nurses came in and were very professional, but it felt to me as though they were fussing, because of course I've just got a bad cold, I don't need all this. And then the A&E doctor came in and she talked to me. I gave her the information that I'd been given on an email, and she was saying, great, this helps, this really helps, and talked to me about what was going to happen. And obviously the immediate concern was my red blood cells were not absorbing oxygen for some reason, and she wanted to understand why that might be happening. The other problem was somebody who has a compromised immune system like me, you've got an infection. So I had bloods done, I went to X-ray, had all of that done. She came back and said, it's not clear whether you've got a bacterial or viral infection. It looks like it could be a bit of both. So we are putting you on, and the nurse was doing it as we spoke, we're going to put you on an antibiotic drip. We are going to put you on oral antivirals. When I first arrived, they'd already put me on paracetamol drip to try and get my temperature down, which it did. It didn't normalise it, but it certainly got it down. And my oxygen still wasn't right. So the oxygen in my blood, not the oxygen in my lungs. A fantastic doctor came in who said they were from acute medicine and they were going to admit me. It was about, I had the ambulance at about 2:30, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. This was by now about 10 p.m. And he said, and we're going to admit you. And I said, I just want to go home. Can't I just go home? And he said, no, because your blood oxygen is so low that no, we're not unless you absolutely insist, but it would be against medical advice. And I'm not so daft, usually, that I would go against sound medical advice. He knew a lot about Langerhans, and I didn't know why, and so I did say to him at one point, have you Googled that? And he said, no. He said, but I was working until fairly recently at a local hospital that specialises in heart and lungs. And one of my colleagues, one of the consultants, had diagnosed a Langerhans. And he said, that was the first one they'd seen. It was amazing because you don't catch Langerhans that often. And their labs test for everything anyway, so they caught it. But he said, that was amazing, wasn't it? And I asked him when that had been, and he told me, and I said, that was me. I was that patient. So he then proceeded to say, do you mind if I ask you some questions? And there were questions about symptoms and how I was coping and how I was diagnosed and all sorts of things. But sadly, I hadn't distracted him from his mission of getting me admitted, which I didn't want. I was admitted and carried on with the antivirals and the antibiotics. And after 2 days, I was allowed to go home with a goodie bag of more antibiotics, but apparently I'd had enough antivirals, but the rest of the antibiotic course. So that whole experience reminded me that I'm living every day with this, and it becomes part of your life, a horrid part of your life that you don't want and you wouldn't wish on anybody, but it does become part of your life. And because I'm one of the fortunate people with cancer who at the moment I'm not in horrific pain, I don't have that sort of constant reminder of what's happening to me. So it's easy to forget. And so going to the hospital and having people rushing around and, they were wearing masks. And I thought, it's 2025, why are you wearing masks? I did ask one of the nurses, and she looked a bit puzzled, and she said, it's to protect you. And I said, is it? And she said, well, you have a compromised immune system. We don't want to breathe germs on you. And I thought, yeah, I've got cancer. And I felt a bit stupid when I got home, because I thought, yeah, when I want to be in denial, I can make this quite abstract and forget. And then at times, particularly if one's feeling low, you remember that you have something that has the capacity to kill you. And it reminds you of all sorts of things about loved ones and things you want to achieve still, and just things. I will talk about the whole symptoms diagnosis type story in another video, because it's long, because I have Langerhans, but originally I was diagnosed with ovarian cancer, and at the same time as the ovarian cancer, they chucked him brain tumour as well, because bad things come in threes, I suppose. So I'm in complete remission from the ovarian cancer, but the brain tumour and the Langerhans are still very much with me, and we'll talk about that, and I'll give you more information about it. But please watch a bit more about it. The next video will be about the day that I was diagnosed with cancer, which had a big impact, as you can imagine, had a big impact on me. Thank you so much for spending time with me today. I hope it's been informative. If you wish to help me and the channel, please just stick me a thumbs up in the bit below. If you feel inspired to subscribe, but I will certainly see you in the next one. Thank you.